Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's July 9th, 2021 program. Oregon Legislative Wrap-Up: What Got Done in the 2021 Long Session. This is the 39th program of our 2020-2021 programming year. My name is Scott Coltrane, and I'm the past president of the City Club of Eugene. Support for the City Club is provided by our members and our sponsors. You can become a member of the City Club at our website, cityclubofeugene.org. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, and are broadcast on public radio station KLCC 89.7 FM on Mondays at 7 p.m. We have both business and in-kind sponsors, including our diamond sponsors, Kaiser Permanente, University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College, as well as receiving generous support from the City of Eugene and from Lane County. In today's program, we welcome Representative Ron Noble, Representative Dan Rayfield, and Representative Andrea Vanderrama. Biographical information on our speakers is available on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. I would like to thank Mary Layton for coordinating today's program. At the end of June, the Oregon State Legislature adjourned after a productive session that began in January. Legislators survived more than the usual amount of drama while producing some remarkable outcomes for the people of Oregon. Both House and Senate members deliberated, debated, and voted on a great variety of bills. In this program, three representatives will describe from their points of view what got done, what started, and what needs to be finished in later sessions, along with what seemed to indicate improving relationships across the aisle. Our format today includes a question and answer period with City Club members and guests via Zoom. For today's session, Mary Layton, the coordinator, posed 4 questions for our 3 panelists. What are you pleased to have accomplished this legislative term? What will you continue to work on, having begun the long process of getting it right? What bipartisan efforts were especially encouraging? And what else do you want us to know? We'll begin with Ron, then Andrea, and then Dan. Ron?
Well, hello. Thank you for hosting this. My name is Ron Noble. I'm the state representative from House District 24, which is McMinnville up through Hillsborough. And I like to, not to make anybody jealous, but really it's the heart of wine country, as I like to call it. The legislative session this year was my 3rd. And each session seems to have brought a unique challenge. This year, I think everybody knows the challenge being virtual. And then working out different logistics on the floor when we finally made it into the Capitol. We started off really remotely and not in any floor sessions, and did a lot of work remotely. And then we ended up finishing, obviously, in the Capitol. But we did accomplish quite a bit. And my assignments this session were on 5 policy committees dealing with transportation, the judiciary and criminal justice, police reform, healthcare, and human services. So a lot of things that deal with and impact a lot of people's lives. I would say most of my time, quite honestly, was working specifically with supporting police reform and trying to hit that balance and trying to improve and allow the profession to grow, at the same time protecting people from officers who maybe should no longer be serving. So we accomplished quite a bit with regard to police reform in requiring agencies to become accredited, similar to the way hospitals are accredited, or higher education is accredited. We require officers to intervene when another officer is no longer, or is acting outside the scope of the law. We have better arbitration now. There's been a fix to allow police chiefs and police managers to follow policy with regard to discipline. And instead of in the binding arbitration world, without getting too deep, with posing the question to try and make everybody happy, now it's just a matter of if someone violated a policy and the discipline is consistent with the policy, then the arbitrator needs to uphold that. And if they did not violate the policy, or if they did not discipline within the policy or the guidelines, then the arbitrator would not uphold that. It provides a black and white, much more clear ability for officers to be held accountable. There's several things like that. We also were very successful in addressing some needed reforms and relief. I think it would be an understatement to say that we have had a difficult year and a half between the pandemic, and wildfires, and other issues. So we were able to allocate some dollars, and I won't get too deep into the dollars because I know one of my colleagues who's very deep into the budget is with us as well, and I'll let him speak to that. But we were able to actually address wildfire relief. We were able to address some COVID economic relief, both for landlords and for renters. We were able to invest in behavioral health in a way that we haven't been able to in a long time. And I think people know that the last 18 months has been difficult and very hard on people who suffer from addiction, children with school, and those who sometime were abused. So we've been able to invest in those systems. We've been able to invest in housing, and then other infrastructure. There's a lot of opportunity. I think the questions that were posed at the beginning all kind of fit into a bipartisan work as well. I know that the legislature, so obviously we can get partisan on some things, but I think for the most part, a lot of these things that impact, and these topics that impact people that I've mentioned, from wildfire to COVID and behavioral health and housing, have been a very collaborative effort, including police reform. And this is not an anti-police reform. This is very much a pro-police, pro-citizen. Let's figure out what works best in our state and try to improve it for the safety and well-being of our citizens. So this is not an either or. This is actually working together to ensure that our law enforcement are the best in the nation and provide the safest environment for all people, regardless of where they live, in cities or out in the rural areas. So I don't know that I need to take any more time than that. I know I have a couple colleagues with us, so I'm going to turn this over to Representative Vanderrama and let her go with the questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you all so much for having us here this afternoon. We're so excited to share a little bit more about what happened this legislative session. So hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Vanderrama. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I have the pleasure of serving as the state representative for House District 47, which is in Outer East Portland. I want to just talk a little bit about my district for a couple minutes before I jump into some of the things that we accomplished, because this really was a session that I think folks will talk about for quite a while, right? And as we heard from the representative just a few minutes ago, all of our districts were really facing significant issues ranging from climate change. I know in my district specifically, some of the unfortunately largest number of heat-related deaths just happened in my district, some of the highest number of COVID cases. We also have one of the most racially and ethnically diverse districts in the state. And I would also argue some of the best tacos and food in the state. And I think this context is important because we all represent our districts. We all go into the Capitol to serve and highlight the needs and the asks of our constituents. And I'm very proud and honored to say that with the limited time that I had coming in a little late in the session, I was able to pass over 50 priority bills of and by my community in district who were really facing a lot of these issues head on. a lot of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color caucus priority bills as well around public safety. And the representative did a really great job talking about a lot of those that were really a great example of good collaboration. Environmental justice was also something that we're experiencing and also knew was a needed priority, policy priority. Childcare, which I'll talk about here in a minute, was a personal priority to me and something that I overwhelmingly heard from many mothers and parents. Health and wellness issues in terms of cover all people and mental and behavioral health, and just so many other bills that were really clearly articulated as needs from our communities. And I also just want to lift up that the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, allowed us to make targeted investments that we knew would be necessary and really provide that catalytic environmental, economic and community development that we knew would be important in this economic recovery. And so I am proud to share that I worked with my Senator Casey Jama, and Representative Jeff Reardon to propose and allocate $8 million to fund 15 different projects in our area, and $2 million of that will specifically go into House District 47, ranging from things like business support, economic development, really honing in on BIPOC communities and lifting them up as we can. And then the last thing that I'll say, to me personally, when I read this question in terms of an accomplishment, we were operating under so many different unusual circumstances. The first ever virtual session, wildfire recovery, still really in the middle of a pandemic. But to me, and my staff always know this to be true as well, constituent and district engagement was so important to me, and I know for so many other folks in the district. And even through all of the things that we were experiencing, we still had many town halls. I had my newsletter going out. We were able to get translated materials into Spanish. I think that the engagement with the people and constituents was very important, and something that I'm proud that we were still able to do amidst all of these varying and tumultuous circumstances. So those are just very high level points, some of the accomplishments and priorities that I'm excited about that we were able to get done this session. And I will turn it over to my colleague now, Representative Reardon, Representative Rayfield. Apologies.
Thank you. I guess good afternoon, good morning. I'm not sure when people will be watching this. So my name is Dan Rayfield. I am the state representative from the Corvallis and Philomath area. And my role, and I think it's important to note, is all of us have these different spaces in the legislature in which we operate. And you've kind of heard a little bit about that today. Where I operate mostly is in a budget sphere within the legislature. So I'm the House co-chair of the Joint Committee on Ways and Means. And so most of my time is spent, where we're developing the budgets for the various agencies. We're looking at the policy proposals that have come down to Ways and Means. And that's where I sit in this legislative space. I think this session was very unique. It's historic in ways that probably many other sessions will never live up to. If you think about when we entered into the beginning of a session, if you go back to a January where vaccines had not been something where it was a reality for at least a lot of the legislators coming into the session, we were dealing with significant crises from the pandemic, from the wildfire. Remember, you have, continued people have been forced out of their homes that we're working with there. You have economic recovery issues that are present, and they're very palpable. And we're going into a session where we were projected to have a significant budgetary shortfall, and it was unsure whether we were going to have federal assistance. And a lot of this was, how do we stay afloat and take care of all these Oregonians experiencing these different challenges? And that was when we started out the session. By the time we ended, there was a transformational process that we went through in the session where there was significant federal relief dollars that came in. Our economic forecast it got better. And I think it's important to note is, while many of us, we can try and look at an economic forecast and think, boy, Oregon's doing well. The one thing that was really noticeable in absolutely every economic forecast during the last year is that the reason why our revenue in Oregon didn't take the dip it did is because the people who were always doing good are continuing to do good. The folks that were most impacted by the pandemic, the wildfires, all of these different issues are the folks that have been struggling throughout the years. And so it's a very interesting kind of position to be in, where economically the state is doing well, but there's still a lot of folks struggling day to day. And we took that with us into this session. Some of the most significant things, I mean, from the top lines that I think about, historic accomplishments. When we started this session, there were tens of thousands of people that did not have health care, that as the result of this legislative session will now get health care, whether that's part-time faculty, whether that is cover all people. That's a significant gap that we are marching forward to continue, frankly, to make sure that everybody in Oregon has health care, and there's still more work to be done on that. We passed a task force that will continue moving us forward to look at single-payer health care here in Oregon. When we went into this legislative session, there were thousands of Oregon students on wait lists trying to get what we call the Oregon Opportunity Grant so that they can go to college and come out with less debt. We made some significant investments where now 11,000 students will actually get those grants to be able to go to college or have less debt when they come out of college. We passed historic K through 12 budgets. We think about your teacher ratios, significant investments into racial justice and equity lens programs within our K through 12 budgets. When we think about even our higher ed budgets, again, there's a layer of the pandemic, and while they have state revenue, there's also shortfalls in these educational, whether the University of Oregon, whether it's Oregon State University or true universities like Western Oregon University or community colleges. We had to make sure that they were properly funded to a level that still allows them not to hike tuitions to offset some of those other budgetary shortfalls that they were experiencing due to the pandemic. Because when you start looking behind the scenes, you think about University of Oregon or some that have different revenues, say in residential facilities, sports revenue, things like that. A lot of our facilities or universities were experiencing significant shortfalls. Other big things that we did, I would think about, what I would say is like our emergency management modernization. We found out during the last year that there's a lot of room for improvement, and there's always room for improvement. And so when we looked at how do we want to do this better in the future, we have a good representative, Paul Evans, who's been working on this for about 4 years to modernize our emergency management, to create a new agency. That was done this session with significant investment. We also put significant investments into public health and trying to learn from what happened over the past year, so that way when and this does occur again, we'll be better prepared in the future. Thinking about the environment was another big area where we come from, and in a lot of our districts, that is one of the persistent crises that we're continuing to experience. We work towards taking steps with 100% clean energy was a bill that was passed, and we can dig into that more. We did one of a historic investment of $10 million in residential solar, something that had not been done in the past, or we're only doing smaller investments, again, trying to move forward. The other things that we looked at, I would say nationally, where we have a climate where it's reducing voter access. The legislature in Oregon was actually able to buck the national trend and look at how do we expand voter access, making sure that when ballots are mailed on the day of the election, they're going to be counted. When someone sits down to fill out their ballot, we should count their vote if it was filled out and mailed by the election day. And so that's something the legislature took leadership on, that really bucked the national trend, as well as activating numerous what I would say voters who were inactivated just because they didn't vote. We have valid addresses for these people, but they were put on the inactive rolls because they hadn't voted. And so we're making sure that everybody who is eligible to vote and has a valid address actually will get a ballot. And so those are some really exciting things. We also had some really significant infrastructure packages. Again, thinking about the economic harm that has resulted. There was more than $2 billion of infrastructure investment, from water to housing to university bonding, just all across, spans the gamut of where the investments are made across the state. And then lastly, housing and behavioral health. These are two significant ongoing crises that we've been dealing with in Oregon for biennium after biennium. And we made over an $800 million investment in housing this year, which any of us who participate in housing, I sit on our housing authority board here in Linn-Benton County, that's a drop in the bucket, but it's a needed drop. And we need to continue to move on that investment, as well as behavioral health. This is something that is, none of these things are overnight switches that we're going to flip that are going to change the landscape, but there's significant steps that we're taking to address these crises. And that was close to around a $400 million investment that was made into behavioral health into different pots. Again, when you look back at what we accomplished, I don't think that there's going to be very many legislative sessions that will span the breadth of momentous things that we're able to accomplish. So it's very exciting to be a part of it, but again, it was probably the most challenging session to be a part of as well, given a lot of the constraints of a session in the midst of a pandemic where we are socially distanced. And with that, I believe I'm supposed to transition us off to questions and answers.
For our question and answer period, we normally have a first questioner who's knowledgeable about some of the issues the panelists have addressed. We invited Joel Eboa, Executive Director of Oregon Just Transition Alliance and Chair of Eugene's Human Rights Commission, to be our first questioner today. Unfortunately, he was pulled away and could not join us, but he submitted 2 questions, and we'll begin with those. His first question is, do you believe enough was done this legislative session to address police brutality? Ron, you want to start that one off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Scott. Just a little bit of background for the audience listening. I am a state representative. My background, my professional history is in law enforcement. And I think that's why I played a role in the subcommittee on equitable policing as vice chair. There's a lot of talk about policing, and rightfully so, throughout the whole nation and in Oregon. And we have more work to do, I guess, to answer the first question. But part of that is to ensure people know that policing is not, and police departments are not the fourth branch of government. The police departments are part of the executive branch. And we have the governor who's responsible for the state police. We have city councils that are responsible for city police. We have sheriffs that are elected directly by the people in the counties that are responsible for the sheriff's offices. And they admittedly are the most visible part of government. But there's a lot of work we need to do within all of government, not just policing, to ensure our citizens are treated equitably and fairly, through a lens of racial equity, and to ensure people are not marginalized. And part of that has to do with the laws we create that I am partially responsible for. Part of that has to do with how we adjudicate the laws. And then we need to be sure that we know which laws we want to have and where we go from here. Meaning, I know I've watched in my career more duties being placed on police officers to become, not just in name, but they essentially become a jack of all trades, from not just crisis response to mental health professionals. And I think we need to take a look at what we ask of our police officers, what laws we actually want to enact and what we ask them to enforce, and to ensure that we actually are providing a safe community, that we are asking those men and women who have stepped forward to do this, and giving them a way to be successful. And maybe that has to do with changing our laws and our structure. Maybe it has to do with sentencing reform. Maybe it has to do with what we ask of our police officers to do in our communities. So I guess the initial response is, yeah, we have a whole lot more work to do. And I know that is part of my job and what I'll be doing during the interim here to get ready for the next session.
Andrea, to you.
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Joel. As someone who has been working on this issue prior to my work as a state legislator, I can say that there's always more work to be done. I do believe, especially as a mom and as a school board member in David Douglas, I'm really looking at additional support that we can provide upstream to children so that police are not the first responders in every case, or responding to issues that perhaps others, like social workers in schools or other mental behavioral health folks in the community, like a program like Cahoots does in Portland, can be more thoughtful about really getting folks the services they need and the response necessary, instead of one that quite often ends in violence for communities of color. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing. I will also just lift up that HB 2002, the Justice Reinvestment Bill, was something that was very important to me and lots of coalition members, and Reimagine and Fair Shot Coalition. I will be continuing to support and lift up that bill as much as I can. And then the last component of this that I'll say is, I absolutely, addressing the need for an end to police brutality, but also public safety as a whole, community safety as a whole, to me and my community also mean a little bit broader things. I know in the immigrant and refugee community, there's violence or concerns around ICE. And so really looking at other ways that we can support our immigrant and refugee communities, whether it's through universal representation or providing other supports, and also really paying a close eye on our shared values and past violence, even perhaps towards Indigenous communities, and really making sure that we're being thoughtful about what a comprehensive support structure, both in policy and budget, looks like for all BIPOC communities, Black and Indigenous communities of color.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you. What I would say is I think that in this last legislature, there was some significant progress that was made because there was attention and focus on the issue. I think moving forward, I think it could be very easy to get complacent, and over time, and we've seen this, through periods in our history where we lose that focus, or that focus is not as honed as it as the years go on. And I think it's going to be incumbent upon the elected officials and the community leaders to stay focused on this, to continue to make the progress that we're talking about, and to remember that, yes, while we did pass some really good things, there was some amazing legislation that didn't make it over the hurdle this session. And that is going to take a lot of work and commitment upon not only just legislators, but community leaders to help us move those policies forward. And so I think that is where, I'm excited with what we did, but we kind of really hit the low-hanging fruit and the really meaningful stuff that is going to make some really significant progress. I'm really looking forward to in the future. And so I think that is, and I would agree with all the comments of my colleagues as well.
Thanks. Next question from Joel Aboa is, the effects of climate changes are here. A farm worker by the name of Sebastian Francisco Perez died during Oregon's historic heat wave. He was one of almost 100 Oregonians who perished. What must the legislature do to protect our most vulnerable workers and residents from increasingly dangerous temperatures? Dan, you want to start off on that one?
Yeah, first off, what I would say is I would like to see OSHA adopt temporary rules, specifically when it comes to what I would say kind of these emergent workplace conditions that are hazardous to individuals' health, not only just heat, but also as we think about wildfires when it comes to smoke. And if they are in the process of doing that or unwilling to do that, we as the legislature can then step in to help make sure that every workplace, right, is wherever that is in the state, right, is that it is safe and healthy for all those that are there.
Ron?
Maybe unmuting works better. So I would agree with my colleague in that this being a workplace issue, I'm interested to see exactly what the investigation that OSHA is doing shows. We have a lot of I guess, guidelines and regulations in place. If there's something new that needs to be done, then to protect our workers, absolutely. If this is a matter of just ignoring existing guidelines, then I think people need to be held accountable as well. But I think we're gonna find that out soon. And then I trust with everything that we've been doing through COVID, through the wildfires, and as we're beginning to open up, that OSHA will take the correct steps to ensure that our workers are safe.
Thank you. Andrea.
Yes, thank you again, Howard, for the question. I believe that no one should die on the job. No worker should die on the job. I was pretty horrified and saddened to hear of the death that recently occurred as a result of working. I did send a letter to the governor asking for OSHA's temporary rules to be implemented as soon as possible. I know Representative Ruiz and others also have been having these conversations and doing what we can to expedite this process. In the meantime, I also was disheartened to see bills like from worker overtime not move forward. I think when we look at my values of economic justice and why people are working in such conditions, it's important that we lift all boats as much as we can, and that means that we're paying folks as well as we can, that they have conditions that are healthy for them to be working in and not further jeopardizing their health. And I also look at other work ahead, things like essential worker pay and making sure that we're providing a good, solid economic support system for our most essential workers. I think the one other component of this that I'll mention briefly as well is the first part of that question, and also just want to lift up that the effects of climate change are happening all over our state, all over our world. And as we look at these incredible historic investments in infrastructure, anti-displacement is really important to me, and making sure that if folks are at risk of being displaced, that we're being thoughtful about not just infrastructure development, but creating communities that folks can stay in, that they are able to have good weatherization and support in their community as a whole, so that folks can feel safe, not only outside in their communities, but also inside their homes when different climate events are happening as well.
Thank you. Additional questions for today's panelists were compiled with the help of Connor Radnovich, state politics reporter for the Statesman Journal and president of the Oregon Legislative Correspondents Association. First question, what will you continue to work on during the interim and heading into the 2022 short legislative session? For example, Representative Rayfield, there were not any bills passed that address campaign finance reform, despite voters supported Measure 107 in November. What do you see in the future?
So I think good context for folks listening to remember is that in the House, when you go into a short session, House members are only allowed to have 2 bills. And just remember, it is a short session, so you don't have the full 6 months where you're vetting policy. The advantage of the short session is that a lot of bills that didn't get over the hurdle in the long session, we do have this ability to continue to work on them as we approach the short session in hopes that those can finally get over the hurdle. One of those in the past, if you think about, was our historic minimum wage bill that we passed in Oregon. That was a long session bill that we worked through the interim and then were able to pass in the short session. It was a meaningful policy, but it just took a little bit extra work outside of the long session. So let's keep that in context as we move forward. Our office has spent a lot of time throughout the years working on campaign finance reform. In 2019, we're able to move 3 bills. One of those was the referral that Connor mentioned to the voters, which then changed our Constitution, which allows Oregon, should they want to be able to put campaign finance limits into place. Additionally, it allows us to do transparency measures. For instance, our prior constitution didn't even allow us to require paid for by a given entity to put on various ads. And so now that we have that foundation and the voters overwhelmingly approved them, we spent a significant amount of time during this last 21 session building upon a conversation of 2019 of what should our campaign finance limit system look like. We're going to continue that process in the interim with the goal of how do you, A, reduce the impact of money, big money in politics, right? The influence of that money, which a lot of people have grown to a significant distaste for. The other side of that is how do you create a system that is equitable, right? And a system that does not perpetuate inequities the way that our current system does. And that was another significant focus of a fairly large work group of, I think it was more than 50 people who would come weekly or bi-weekly to these meetings trying to figure out a system. Now, here's the really difficult part about that, is in a legislature made up of 90 individuals who are, and all of us come to the table with strong opinions. There are 90 different opinions on what that system should look like. There are some people who don't think we should have any limits at all, right? And the reason they don't believe in limits is because they want to see where the money is coming. And so when you see other limits or other states with limits, the lower those limits are, then you start what we is shifting money into independent expenditures, right? This is what we call dark money that comes in and just buys ads without the candidates being able to control that message. And the way I always try and explain it to folks is if I had $1 million to spend and the legislature told me, well, you can only spend 1,000 of it. So I've got $999,000 to spend. I'm going to find a different way to influence that election if I really wanted to spend that money. And that's the dynamic that we have, which gets that this must be coupled with transparency as well, because no matter where you place those limits, you are going to see an influx of independent expenditures based on real life experiences of other states that have done this, and also, frankly, our federal politics. So this is something that we're grappling with, and there are some people in the legislature who actually don't mind having more independent expenditures and would love to have lower limits of, say, $100, where most legislators wouldn't be able to hire the staff that they would need to, say, to knock on doors or be able to pay wages and benefits, of what we call kind of like a living wage job for candidate staff. And they like that disconnect between big money and the actual candidate and find value in that. And so that is what I would say, the choppy waters that we're trying to navigate. And I often, and Connor, if he's listening, he better listen, right? He gave us these questions. He better go through this. I always give the example to him that it's, we're trying to find the porridge that Goldilocks ate, right? But there is, and I will tell you, it is just an endless pursuit of trying to figure it out, because there's also a point where, do we have the votes to be able to pass a comprehensive bill in the legislature? And then if not, then that's something that we as voters, we as Oregonians should take to the ballot, right? And it's that tough part as a legislator is, when do you say this compromise is enough? I'm not willing to go any further. Let's put that to the ballot. But then the other hitch with that is it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of people to put something on the ballot and run a measure like that. And I would be remiss not to talk about a bill that I think is actually what I would say is the gold standard in trying to reduce barriers for folks to run for office, as well as reducing the what I would say the influence of big money in politics. And it's a bill that really empowers everyday Oregonians to be on the same footing as the $1 million donor. And it's called the Small Donor Match Program. And it's very simple. It's when a candidate agrees not to take more than $250 from any single source. They then, if they meet certain qualifying thresholds, they then are able to get a 6-to-1 match on every small dollar donation that they get of $250 and less. And really, it empowers that candidate to win elections with $250 donors or less versus the well-heeled candidate that's taking in, you know, $5, $20, $50,000 checks. And it's a really way to balance the playing field, open up the system, and diversify the legislature in a way that has not been done, but has been done in other areas that have adopted similar policies. And so I could go on for a long time. That's probably why Connor asked that question. So I'll pass it off at this point.
Representative Valderrama, can you focus on highlight a few issues you're going to be working on in the interim leading up to this short session?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I will also just kind of reiterate some of the things that I shared before. I was very honored to have been part of the really historic investment that we made in education, $9.3 billion in schools and higher education. And again, as a school board member, I'm going to continue to keep an eye on what's happening in our schools, especially as we're reopening, so to speak, this fall and having kiddos come back to school in person. But to me, it's also important that we are being intentional about diversifying our staff, and again, looking at what public safety looks and feels like in our school hallways. I also have been really pleased with the committees that I've had the opportunity to serve on. In our revenue committee, I will be on leading a work group with Representative Levy on historic homes. And we have some work, some additional work in that committee, I will say, on harvest tax. We also are in that committee, really just looking for, and I think as the BIPOC caucus as a whole, as we really look at our future agenda, we have additional revenue that we are predicting for a couple more biennia. And so we really, again, just want to make sure that we're prioritizing our values, making sure that investments continue to go to those most in need, whether it's in rural communities or those low-income communities or BIPOC communities. Are really going to be intentional about making sure that we're advocating for that. Universal representation, I shared before, is something that I'm very interested in continuing to work on in coalition. And then there's some public safety issues that I also just want to continue to lift up. Obviously, HB 2002 and what happens there. But again, in Outer East Portland, we're facing a really interesting nexus of many simultaneous urgent needs. So whether it's, you know, significant climate change and heat issues, or still high cases of COVID, or even things like gun violence, or things that are really impacting my community pretty drastically. So I will be really interested to see what else we'll be able to do in terms of supporting our communities to make it feel safe and livable. We also know that there's been an increase in anti-Asian violence and discrimination, and for BIPOC communities as well. So those will be a couple other points that I'll be looking at for potential legislation. And then just lastly, a couple other things, you know, vaccinations are really important. So in the interim, I'm actually just going to continue to lift up the needs for vaccination clinics, making sure that we're doing our due diligence there. And campaign finance reform is also something that I'm very interested in and will keep an eye on. It's something that my community has been lifting up, but also really thinking creatively about what campaign reform can really look like. So whether it's public financing, I know we have something really similar that I worked on at the City of Portland, as well as things like redistricting and that process that will happen and we'll come back to in the fall in September. Again, these are issues that I know my community and lots of communities of color are really interested in seeing, not just where the money goes, but who has the opportunity and the access to serve in these roles, and how can we make that process more accessible and reflective of our districts and Oregonians. So those are just some of the things in a nutshell that line up with kind of what I've been hearing from the community and my own values around economic justice, and what you can look forward to seeing me probably reach out to you about.
Thank you. Representative Noble, what are you going to be working on policing and beyond?
Well, policing's one, yes. You know, and as we continue on with the discussion of criminal justice and law enforcement, we've done, I think I need to just give an accolade to Representative Janelle Bynum, the chair of both the Judiciary and the Policing Committee that I sit on and work with. in that we've been able to move forward in a very cautious manner to ensure we minimize any unintended consequences, that we don't leave any communities unsafe or without services as we continue to raise the bar, so to speak. And I know that we've had discussions already and we're moving in that direction. We have more work to do. Representative Valderrama mentioned House Bill 2002. I would say it's not ready yet, but I think we are all headed in the same directions with justice reinvestment and how those dollars that were set aside initially in 2013, how they're best used to invest into our communities to ensure that we're going upstream to keep people out of crisis before law enforcement is left with dealing with picking up the pieces, so to speak, and really encouraging and providing safe communities. And not just expecting law enforcement to essentially deal with issues that they aren't prepared to deal with. But as Representative Rayfield said, in the short session, we have 2 bills each. So as we are working with law enforcement, both state, county, and city, to determine what is appropriate conduct and what discipline looks like, I am exploring what that looks like for all public employees and what is the expectation that the citizens of the state of Oregon, the residents, should have of all public employees in the realm in which they work, whether it be education or within finance or anything else they're doing at the state, county, or city level, to ensure that their conduct is consistent with our expectations. Obviously, everybody has there are different professions, different jobs, so that's going to look different to some extent for people. But then there are some behaviors that I would suggest that are absolutely not tolerated across different professions and different disciplines. So that's one. And then, we have, again, behavioral health issues. One of the bills that I passed this last session had to do with youth suicide and providing greater supports. I think we need to continue to move in that direction to ensure we provide our youth specifically with more supports to be able to deal with some of these. Adults are having difficulty dealing with what we're dealing with right now. And as we continue to move forward, we need to ensure our youth, our next generation, is prepared as best we can prepare them to be able to survive, and then not actually more than survive, to thrive in the environment that they're going to be in once we're gone. So that's kind of where I'm headed. I know we have, at the same time, I'm looking at the 2023 session and planning for policy bills there. I would add just briefly on finance reform. I am a absolute supporter of reform. I think, though, that if you look at our state, at least our legislative elections, there are really only a handful that are competitive, that reach the $1 million mark. And my district happens to be one of those every year, or every 2 years, every election, where we have a very competitive race. So I think we need to take a look at, when we're talking about matching funds, are we matching funds in districts that maybe are not competitive to begin with, or maybe don't even have a competitor? So I know that those are some of the details that may be included in the bill. And I know that my colleagues are all understanding of that, but there are some things that we need to, as we're moving forward, ensure that we're minimizing, I guess, the unintended consequences, to ensure that there is truly fair access and equal access in elections.
And Scott, you may not have caught it, but there was an announcement hidden in Representative Noble's thing. He said in 23. And so I think the follow-up question should be, Ron Noble, are you announcing right here, right now, that you're running for re-election?
I love this work, and I have no reason to not want to be re-elected. But as most of us right now, I am taking a break. And other than doing, a couple of these for the next month, I'm really not thinking too much down the road other than policy. And even if I'm not there, I will be pushing policy. How's that?
Typical politician.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, next question. Connor again is asking, the 2021 session really was like no other. what with the need to respond to the crises of 2020 and the Capitol building being closed to the public for the first time. Representative Valderrama, you had perhaps the unenviable task of jumping into this session midway. Can you describe what it was like for you and if working as a legislator matched your expectations?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yes, it was quite an unusual experience. As I shared before, there were just so many other simultaneous things that we were going through as legislators as we were passing our policy bills and our budget, working remotely for the first time, conducting business in committees virtually, making, really just being in a building of and by the people that had no community in it, right? That feels different. And so it was definitely quite a journey, but I was just really, truly humbled that my community of PCPs voted me in, that I received unanimous support from the Multnomah County Commissioners. I shared earlier also that, my community in outer East Portland, we were facing and continue to face so many things simultaneously very quickly. And so I'm just very honored to serve my district and honored to have had the opportunity to step in immediately, having had the experience that I do as an advocate and as a school board member, to really hit the ground running with an exceptional team and coalition relationships to get through the amount of engagement that we did in coalition and with key community stakeholders, really set the ground for us for the next couple of years. My heart is really, truly in public service. And so I don't know if it necessarily met my full expectation. I don't know how you can really have an expectation of working within a pandemic. I would say, really the most unusual part, I feel like I kept telling this to everyone, the most unusual part was just going back to a workplace, right? I was really quarantined for a year. And so really just interacting with colleagues again, asking, how was your pandemic? Did you get a pet? All these kind of little things that, made it an interesting session. So I was just very honored to have had the opportunity to jump in, and very looking forward to continuing the work ahead and to continuing to serve my district for as long as they'll have me.
Thank you. Representative Rayfield, what lessons did you learn from this unique session and especially about how the public can best interact with lawmakers?
So I think one of the and this is a big thing that I think that was really went quiet behind the scenes is the modernization of our legislature. We have a very archaic system, in my opinion, that doesn't reach out to folks in their communities. And throughout the sessions, and for a period of time, I served in our House leadership team as our whip, and we would negotiate House rules about. And one of the things that would come up is taking remote testimony from places all across the state. And how do you engage people who frankly have a job, that care about these issues? They may not know about them, but if they do, how are they going to take a day off of work to travel to Salem to be able to testify on these issues? And the pandemic really forced us to think outside the box about engaging people. But I think that's only one small step of remote testimony. There's so much more that we can be doing in terms of how do you connect the folks that are making laws about the things that people are experiencing in their communities, and how do you really engage folks where it rebuilds trust with government, but at the same time we're also able to get really good feedback, because what I'll tell you as a legislator, as you're taking in testimony, some of the most valuable testimony does not come from lobbyists. It comes from the people who are actually really doing or experiencing the things that they're there to talk to. And it is one of the most humbling experiences to be on a Wednesday at 1:00 in a committee where someone has had to find childcare, they've had to take a day off, and they've had to come to the legislature and to talk to us about that. I would like to see the legislature continue the work of the Modernization Committee, where we find ways to better connect. And I think this pandemic hopefully will be a wonderful springboard as we look about connecting or re-engaging with our communities.
Thanks. Representative Noble, well, you got the last word, last few minutes on what insights you learned from this session. You're muted.
Again, I think to build on what was just said, the bringing in virtual testimony has been a great experience. I think when we move forward, I'm envisioning where we have both in-person testimony and the opportunity for virtual testimony. Some of the things that we're missing personally, people walking through the halls, quick conversations, both with colleagues, because we were limited as to who could be on the floor and how many could be on the floor at any one given time. But then also with just people coming through the Capitol to give you their thoughts. And every conversation was either a telephone call or a Zoom call, which takes more time than just a quick, as you're going between meetings or just walking down the hallway. So there's an earnest effort that we need to make to ensure that we get everybody's opinion and encourage people to participate. And I think as we continue to modernize the legislature, my hope is that we get there. The session, for as difficult as it was, and I'm going to make a statement as a Republican here, was, as a moderate Republican, so it won't surprise too many, was less polarizing overall. I mean, we had our moments than I was concerned about as we began the session, both because of instances locally and across the nation, and within our communities and what was going on. So from that standpoint, even though we had our moments where we were absolutely polarized politically, the session overall was less. And I think we produced more than any one of us thought we were going to at the end of the session.
This has been our July 9th, 2021 program. Oregon Legislative Wrap-Up, What Got Done in the 2021 Long Session. Before we proceed, I'd like to recognize our diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. Support comes from the University of Oregon. Since 1876, UO has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically. More information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health is proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond. As your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years, our mission is to help you and keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. I would like to acknowledge our Ruby sponsor, Johnson & Johnson Lucas. Support for the City Club comes from Johnson & Johnson Lucas and Middleton, a team of experienced, compassionate attorneys fighting for justice. If you have been seriously harmed by wrongdoing and need help, contact them at justicelawyers.com. And one of our Sapphire sponsors, Bennett & Dean Real Estate. Bennett & Dean Real Estate is a full-service real estate brokerage in the Eugene-Springfield area and offers a comprehensive range of services for clients who are looking to buy or sell a home in Lane County. Their experienced, knowledgeable, and informed team has a reputation built on performance, trust, and honesty in every aspect of each property transaction. An acknowledgement for our gold sponsor, Hirschner Hunter Attorneys, LLP, and Doctors Fine, Hoffman, and Sims. Before we thank our speakers today, I have a few more quick announcements. Thank you to our in-kind radio sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing, LLC, and Dot Dotson's Photography. And a special thank you to public radio station KLCC FM 89.7 for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7 p.m. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. If you are a City Club of Eugene member, you can ask a question at a future taping of our programs. If you're not yet a member, you can join and then participate. More information is on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. On our upcoming program on July 16th, we will look at efforts to vaccinate all Oregonians, defeating COVID, vaccine incentives from coast to coast. Please join us on July 16th. More details and information about future programs can be found online at the City Club's website, cityclubofeugene.org. Now I'd like to thank today's speakers for a great program. Representative Ron Noble, Representative Dan Rayfield, and Representative Andrea Vanderrama. Thank you very much for a wonderful program. This concludes today's forum. Be well and stay safe.